Thank you.
More safeguards to put in before they try
Is there anyone who didn't get a chance to sign in yet? Okay. Anyone here? Yeah, not so bad.
Are we missing anybody that you know?
I don't think there's much that doesn't email me.
So we're gonna go.
All right, we're gonna get started to make sure that we begin and we also end on time. We have a real treat today. We have Dr. Jean Mandernach here.
Hello.
Dr. Mandernach is a very well-published author. I have actually read a bunch of her work. She is the executive director of the Center for Innovation and Research and Teaching at Grand Canyon University. Her research focuses on enhancing student learning in the online classroom through innovative instructional and assessment strategies. And she explores these strategies for integrating efficient online instruction in a manner that maximizes student learning, satisfaction, and engagement. And we actually asked her to come in today because it was a request of some of our faculty to talk about how to deal with students who may be difficult. And we all know none of us have difficult students ever, right? Especially at this time of the year. And so she's going to talk a little bit about some strategies and challenges of dealing with students, both in the face-to-face and online classroom. And some of the things that she faces and some of the things that her research has taught her. And so this is a very informal environment. Dr. Mandernach can hear you, she can see you, and feel free to ask questions and converse with her. Dr. Mandernach, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as you said, this is a perfect timing for this presentation because nothing brings out difficult students like finals week. When we start talking about what it means to be a difficult student, one of the challenges is actually defining that. Let me see here if I can get you my PowerPoint up on the screen and get all my windows opened up correctly here, so just give me a moment. Are you able to see the PowerPoint okay? Oops, you guys just went on mute, so I'm not sure. Somebody, okay, yes, I got a yes in the,
All right.
Perfect, thank you so much. And when we talk about, difficult students, really right now we get everything. We start talking about, we hear about all their dying relatives and their internet is out and their computer is down, cheating becomes rampant, they disappear. And in the heart of all of this, somehow it all becomes our fault. And difficult students, really, when we start talking about that, it's students who are struggling and oftentimes struggling in ways that they want to succeed. And that's what's intensifying this difficulty. The challenge here, though, is really difficult students are a continuum. And to give you some really nice advice and tell you exactly what you should do with your difficult students is impossible, because it really depends on what kind of a difficult student they are, what challenges they're struggling with, the context that they bring to your classroom. And while some of the issues are going to be unique for either face-to-face or online learning, some of them are a little more universal. And so we're going to spend time talking about some of those more universal challenges that we might meet, whether it's an online student, a hybrid student, or somebody that we see every single week in our face-to-face classroom. Difficult can be a lot of things. Difficult might simply be that student that sucks the life out of you. It might be that student that just takes up all your time. It might be somebody who's actually disruptive to the learning experience, not only annoying you, but annoying the students around them and causing challenges for other people when they're trying to learn. Difficult students might have to do with academic honesty and the panic they start feeling when they can't get things done, and they resort to less than effective learning strategies. Sometimes it can even be students who become argumentative or dangerous. And I had somebody tell me once, you know, that's not really an issue we have in the online classroom. We don't really have to worry about dangerous students. And so let me just share one of my stories with you. This is something that happened to me 8 years ago now. So I would say I was a relatively new online instructor. I've taught online for about 15 years now. 8 years ago, I'm sitting at my home computer, right here as a matter of fact, and I get a phone call. And I answer the phone, hello, this is Dr. Mandernach. And on the other end of the line, they say, this is the Oregon State Police, state your location. To which I said, seriously, who is this? Because I have really great friends with really bad senses of humor. And so at that point, I kind of laugh, and they're like, we need to know your location. And I was like, what? Who is this really? And they're like, this is the Oregon. So finally, I just said, I'm at home. What do you mean? And they said, well, at home where? And I was like, at home, like in Nebraska. What do you mean where? And then there was a pause on the other end of the line. And they said, so you're not in Oregon? And I said, no. And now I'm starting to freak out a little bit. And then there's another pause. And they said, can we call you back in a moment? And I said, okay. Still not really sure if something's happening or if this is one of my friends. About 10 minutes later, I get another phone call, and they said, we just want to confirm, and they gave me my home address that they had gotten from the records at the university, that this is your home address. And I said, yes. And they said, that is where you are physically located. And I said, yes. And then they went on to tell me that they had just arrested a student on campus with a gun who was walking around campus looking for me. The student was mentally ill. The student took online courses because they really couldn't function socially in the face-to-face classroom. They struggled to fit in. They struggled to interact with people. And as such, they decided to take their courses online. Well, the student was struggling with their own mental illness, and somehow in this whole mix of things had decided that I had wronged him. Specifically, I had failed to use his first name on an email communication. And so I had sent him an email that just started directly with the email, and I had not said his name. And he felt like that was such a disrespectful move on my part that I deserved to die. And the student was arrested and actually served brief jail time before being moved to a mental health facility because I had wronged him in the online classroom. So when we start talking about difficult, it can range anywhere from a student who is off task, who's the class clown, all the way to students who are actually mentally ill, who we don't even know the challenges that they're facing. It can be anything from the unmotivated student who doesn't care to the dramatic student that impedes everyone else's ability to care. The idea of difficult can be a lot of different things. And so I want you to just take a moment, and I want you to go ahead and talk to your neighbor, for those of you that are sitting together. And for those of you that are online, go ahead and post it to the chat. What difficult students do you see in your classroom? Fortunately for me, the dangerous one has only happened twice, ever. Maybe later I'll share my other dangerous story. But I have a lot more common difficult students as well. So take just a moment here and chit chat. What difficult students do you see in your classroom? And if you're online, it might be easier to share that via chat. And if you're in the face-to-face room there, perhaps they can unmute and you can take turns sharing some of those with us. So for those of you sitting in the room together, if you would kind of wrap up and maybe pick a spokesman and share with those of us online, what kind of themes were emerging in your discussions? So do we have a spokesman in the room that would like to share the themes for us?
Do we have a spokesman in the room who would like to share?
Maybe what kind of themes emerged? I'll tell you, the themes online tended to be the student who procrastinated all semester and showed up at the end, now wanting us to save them and angry that we can't do that. Another theme was the academic dishonesty, the I was behind, I cheated, I didn't mean to cheat, I didn't know, and the fact that that takes a lot of our time and a lot of the students' time sorting that out. So our themes online were procrastinators, cheaters, and angry students. What did you find in the classroom there?
Same thing.
Any differences?
Yes, and with anxiety. Just students who are incredibly anxious because they want to do really, really well, and the material is pretty tough. And so they're really anxious, and that makes you kind of anxious because you want them to do well. A little bit there.
Yeah, and one of the compounding that challenge is when a student is anxious, and you hit it right on the head when you said it, they want to do well. So these are not uninvested students. These are not unmotivated students. Typically, the angriest students, the most difficult students, actually do want to succeed, which can make it really, really challenging. And so what we really need to do if we're going to start to break this down is get to the root of the issue. Because we need to understand students from where they're coming from. Most of the time what we're receiving is anger, frustration, hostility. Sometimes it's apathy, the kind of like, I've given up, I don't even care anymore. But we need to understand the source of that. What led to those for the students? And I always say we need to start by stepping back, taking a moment, and thinking about three things from our students' perspective. And that's their situation, their priorities, and their philosophy. This isn't going to solve our problems with difficult students, but it can mediate our response to them. When we start talking about student situations, for many of our students, they're in a very different world than even what we went to school with. The traditional college-age students now is working on average of 19 hours per week. In addition to that, they have family obligations, they often have community service obligations, they have social obligations, and the research tells us they are spending a lot more time simply on social media and the internet and engaging in the online environment inside and outside of the classroom than ever before. In addition to that, they have a high reliance on technology. So sometimes their situation is simply that technology has impeded some of their ability to make progress, to do all the things they needed to do. Compound that with now that they're working and they've got family, they've got other things going on. They just live in a situation now in which time is more constrained. And when we don't have time and when we're busy, we get stressed and we get frustrated, particularly when we compare that to our classrooms, where the deadlines and the things that they have to meet are outside of their control. In addition to that, a lot of students really, really, really care about their grades. In fact, I've got a question for you here. We've done a research study and we've now replicated this study 4 different times. We've replicated it across undergrad, master's, and doctoral level students. And at the heart of it is one simple question. We ask students, if you had to choose between one of these two things, would you either get good grades but not really learn very much, or would you rather learn a lot but get average grades? Notice we didn't say bad grades. We said average grades. So what do you think? When push comes to shove, what do students prioritize? Grades or learning?
Grades.
Yeah, sad but true. What we found overwhelmingly, year after year, regardless of level we're looking at, students care about their grades. So now we have a situation in which they're coming up against deadlines, they care about their grades, yeah, they want to learn, but really when push comes to shove, they want a good grade. And they end up stressed, they end up panicked, they end up desperate. And when we can remember this, then we can start to realize the anger and the hostility and the apathy is not really anger, hostility, and apathy. It's stress. These are students that oftentimes really do care, but they aren't in a situation where they've effectively managed their time, effectively managed their technology, or effectively met our needs or our obligations so that they can meet their own needs for that good grade. Complicating things, students today are different than we were. Most of our students are millennials, the vast majority. Starting next year, we'll see some of these Gen Z moving into the classroom, but right now we're talking about millennials. And even though millennials is a really wide category and it captures a lot of different students in a fairly wide age range, there are some general consistencies across millennials. If we look at the Beloit College Mindset List just for this year, one of the characteristics that really, really jumped out for me is students nowadays think of themselves as consumers. We talk about millennials as the entitled generation. They come into our classrooms not only wanting to learn, but more importantly, wanting the grade and expecting that we are here to help them get that grade. Not that they have to earn that grade, but that they're there to get a grade, and it's our job somehow to move them to that point. It's a philosophical difference. In addition to that, they want instant gratification. So now when they email us at midnight and we haven't responded by 6 a.m., they're mad. They want instant gratification. And they tend to be much less formal. So now they're willing to tell us that they're angry and tell us that they're mad, tell us that we're not responding fast enough. And they're really, really, really comfortable with technology. So they will fire this off in an email, they'll fire this off in a text message, and they really don't want to or have the preference to wait, relax, step back, and give it time to process and let it work through. What that ends up meaning is those students that started out with stressed, panicked, and desperate become really angry. And they become angry at us because we're the ones that they see impeding their goals. We're the ones that aren't answering them the way they want to be answered. We're the ones giving them deadlines. We're the ones in control of those grades. And so students target all of that frustration into anger aimed at us. And so what we're going to talk about today is, what do we do then? What now? I mean, understanding where they come from is helpful, and it's a really good first step, but that doesn't tell us what to do. What do we do when we become the target? And we need to really start to have a comprehensive battery of tools, because there really isn't one thing I can tell any one of you that you should use all the time. I can't even tell you one thing you should use when you have one type of problem, because it all depends on the student. It depends on that student's context. It depends on that student's problems. It depends on where that student is at with their own personal journey. It's all very, very, very individualized. And so while we're thinking about these approaches, my goal today is to help you build a toolbox of possibilities, something that you can use to start walking you through a process that will lead you to a more effective strategy to deal with students, so that in the end, you aren't frustrated, they aren't as frustrated. Chances are they're going to be frustrated, but not as frustrated, and that they can still learn in this environment, which is really the biggest issue here. How do we get them through our classes learning, not just getting them through our classes? And along that same line, we have to think not only about the difficult student, but we have to think about every other student in that course, because one student can change the entire tone of a course. One student can impede everyone else's ability to learn. And this is true whether it's face-to-face or online. So not only do we have to think about how am I going to respond to the difficult student, but how am I going to manage my classroom so that this difficult student doesn't impede or interfere with everybody else's ability for a healthy, effective learning environment. So if we go back to our continuum of difficulty, what we do and how many steps we have to take to deal with a difficult student really is going to depend on where they lie on our continuum. On one end of the continuum, we'll call this the low end of the continuum, is the student that is difficult not because they're interfering with others, but because we aren't sure if we are maximizing their learning experience. So those students sometimes are disappearing. We don't know where they've gone. We don't know if they're done learning or if they're frustrated or angry. We simply have no feedback from them. It might be the student who continues to show up, but is really quiet. They're not participating. They're not engaging. And so it kind of sucks our time and our energy trying to figure out how we can maximize their learning environment. As we move up the continuum, it moves into what I categorize as the annoying student. This is a student that might irritate me, but doesn't actually violate any policies. They may disrupt the classroom experience a little, but they aren't actually derailing the educational journey. And as we move on down that continuum, we have the disruptive students. They may actually be engaging in behaviors, posting inappropriate posts, changing the direction of a conversation, where it actually does disrupt our ability to teach. And then on the far extreme end, like my example I shared with you, is the dangerous student. One that not only could be dangerous to themselves, but possibly to you or to other students in the classroom. And this may be true whether it's online or face-to-face. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on the lower end of the continuum. And I'm going to talk you through a kind of a decision series of steps that we can use to help deal with these difficult students. Recognizing that at any step, if we've solved the problem and the difficulties end, we don't need to go any further. So every single situation doesn't require every single step. Any given situation you can start, and I always say start with the least effort you can put into it. You don't want to be the one that unintentionally escalates a situation. So we want to start simply by changing our mindset. And if we recognize that the vast majority of students are not stepping into our classroom, face-to-face or online, with the intent to disrupt, on the other hand, they might come in tired, they might come in frustrated, but they aren't trying to be a difficult student. When we think about, in particular, the online students that we have, they have developed an arsenal of online interaction habits. Students today quickly instant message, they post on public bulletin boards, they email us, they can post in discussion forums, they are masters at social networking. Interacting online and digital communication is second nature to them. The problem with this is it's so second nature that they don't often stop to think about what they're going to do. There's a ton of research that tells us people will say things online and via digital communication that they would never say face-to-face. That research is held up in the higher ed classroom as well. Students will email us, text us, things that they would not walk up and say if they were in person. And so when we think about their tendency to send these messages and we reflect back on what we know, with them being instant gratification, having an entitled kind of attitude towards learning, wanting that kind of right now response, we have to have a plan in place. How are we going to respond? And so let's start with step one. And step one is really prevention. The first thing we need to do is we need to try to avoid having difficulties in the first place. My syllabi is long, and it's long because I want to make it really clear what I expect from students. Now at this point, you should immediately be thinking, well, that's kind of pointless. They don't read the syllabi anyway, because they don't. And we have lots and lots of research that tell us, nah, they don't read the syllabi. But you know what they will do? They'll watch videos. And this is true if you're in the face-to-face classroom, and this is true if you're in the online classroom. We actually collected data last year that told us students paid more attention to a video presentation face-to-face than they paid attention to a face-to-face presentation face-to-face. Students are still intrigued by multimedia. Somewhere that clicks a heuristic that this is important and this is worth paying attention to. So what I do is I create a very long syllabus so that everything is in writing. The policy exists. And then I create videos. And I will start the videos with something that grabs their attention. So in my behavior expectation video, I actually start it by sharing some of my difficult student horror stories. And I'll tell them, anonymously of course, true, real experiences I've had. And then I say, as such, let me walk you through what I expect from you. And when I talk to them, I do it, even though it's online, much like we're doing right now. I open up my video camera, I point at it, I look at it, and I say, here's what I expect from you. I expect that you're going to give me 24 hours. 24. And then to take that point home, this is my home office. I have all my kids pop up. I have 4 children. I have a husband that acts like a child. I have a dog. We have rabbits. And I show them the chaos behind me. And my kids wave at them. And I look in that camera and I tell my students, this is important to me. You are important to me. But so are they. And so when you email me at midnight, chances are I won't even read that email till 10 a.m. You need to know this. I'm not ignoring you. I'm not discounting you. I'm not undermining what's important to you. But I want them to know, here's my expectations for your behavior, and let me tell you why. That's another thing we know about the millennial generation. They're much, much better at following our policies if they understand why our policies exist. So telling them, you have to give me 24 hours to respond, isn't nearly as effective as showing them why you need 24 hours to respond. I also tell them the late policy, and then I explain why I have a late policy. And I actually go into the details. I have a late policy because these assignments are cumulative. And if you turn that assignment in late, you're not going to be able to do the next assignment. And if you can't do the next assignment, it's going to create a snowball and you're going to get behind in a way that's going to impede your learning. And if I allow you to do that, I'm not teaching you well. And I'm wasting your money in this course. So not only do I give them the late policy, but I explain the rationale for the late policy. Likewise, we go through the communication policy. Again, I share with them examples of bad communication. And I will take emails and I leave them as an email and I screenshot it, take out all the identifying information, and I show them. And I say, no wonder this student and I had problems. I couldn't figure out what they were saying. And then when I responded to them, they couldn't figure out. And I'll say, so this is my expectation for communication. And I tell them things like, I expect you to use capital letters. I expect you to use punctuation. I actually tell them, you can communicate with me via text, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you text me, make sure you give me at least 4 hours to respond to that text because I sometimes teach live. I do webinars. I'm not simply sitting on my phone waiting to respond to you. I also walk them through what is my preferred way of communication. And I'll tell them, if it's an emergency, I prefer that you text me. If it's not an emergency, I prefer an email. And if it's really important to talk, email me and arrange a time to talk. I am very, very clear, and I write this all down. I tell them what they can expect from me, and I tell them what I expect from them. I reiterate the university's academic honesty policy, and then I go into more detail about what that means for me. Let me share with you another example from my life of a difficult student. Just last year, I had a student in one of my online classes come to me and say, hey, I don't really know how to share this with you, but another student in our course tried to hire my roommate to complete her course for her. And I said, well, do you have any evidence? Do you have any proof? It's really hard to take your word for it. And she's like, yeah, I recorded their entire conversation. Okay, well, now we have some problems because now I'm a little concerned about ethics and can we record people? But I said, okay, well, let me see what I can do. So anyway, we go on, we pursue this. The other student tells me it was a joke. She didn't really mean it. She wasn't serious about it. We pursue it. And what it came down to in the end is she said, you know, I reviewed the academic honesty policy and you did not clearly say we couldn't hire other people to do our coursework. True. So guess what my policy now says? You can't hire other people to do your coursework. As I have encountered these difficult students, I continue to expand my policies. And then I share these stories with my students because the millennial generation needs a reason. And so I share it with them. And one of the interesting things that I had a student come back to me and they said, but here's the deal. In our world that we live in, information is everywhere. They said, I don't need to actually know how to get that information if I know how to outsource it. And so they said, you tell me what the difference is between outsourcing somebody doing the work in the course and me being able to verify that it's valid, good, appropriate, and relevant for the grade I want to receive, and me doing it myself. They said, is that cheating or efficiency? And so we had a conversation about the purpose of education and the difference between outsourcing your work and doing it yourself, and why you're here and what skill sets we're trying to build. So it's not only giving them the policy, but talking to them about why the policies exist. This alone can take a lot of time. I now dedicate the first week of my online course to them getting the syllabus, looking at my videos, getting oriented to the course, understanding the expectations. They complete a syllabus quiz about these policies. On the syllabus quiz, it's one they just take in the LMS system. I actually point out all the things that have been hot buttons in the past. So we highlight the late policy. We highlight the turnaround time for me responding to emails. We highlight my preferred communication strategies. So now I've given it to them in writing. I've given them a video where I explain why those policies exist. And I've given them a quiz so that I can verify that they at some point read and understood and acknowledged that they knew those policies. And then, now we can start learning. I will tell you, taking this week of my course, and it depends on whether your course is accelerated or non-accelerated to know whether you should do the, a full week or whether this is a class period. That investment of time, I have gotten back twofold in not having to deal with problems later. And so now, rather than students sending me that email, Sunday night at 10 p.m., frantic, wanting, please accept a late, whatever, what I get is an email on Monday morning that says, hi, so sorry this is late. I understand the late penalty is X. I am knowingly submitting after the late penalty. Thank you. And we move on. And I don't worry about it. They don't worry about it. We're all on the same page. They don't have to get angry that the policy exists. They know. The other thing I've done to help, because one of the biggest issues we get is that whole deal of late work. Late work, late work, late work. And I told students, I have a policy, and it's written right in there. It's the grace policy. And I said, I'll give you grace one time. And you all get grace once. One late assignment, one accidental, one redo. And I kind of walk through what that entails. For example, we now have to explain that plagiarizing an entire paper and turning it in once cannot count for your grace. So not only in the grace policy do I tell them, but I give them that this is what counts as grace. Because I understand that you are busy, that you do get frustrated. But grace is different than irresponsibility. And so I'm willing to give grace, but giving grace multiple times shifts it from grace to irresponsibility. So we're all on the same page. And just by using a grace policy, I now eliminate a lot of those problems and concerns. So step one, figure out what your policies are. And this is more than just telling them, here's what the policy at the university is. This is telling them why it's your policy, why you're implementing it, how you're going to follow it, and what the consequences are for not following that policy. Step two then. So now you've given them the policies, you've laid out expectations, and things intensified. They haven't changed. So they're still being disruptive. They're still being annoying. They are still shifting conversations. The next step really is to go back and shift your perspective. The worst thing you can do is to engage a difficult student in a debate. You don't need to debate them. This is not a power struggle. Don't allow them to turn this into a power struggle. All you need to do now is focus on the issue. So if they want to come to you and they're really, really frustrated and they say, I know your late policy is this, and I used my grace one up earlier because I had a computer problem, but now somebody died and they died and I couldn't control this and I can't believe you aren't allowing me. I can say, I am so sorry and I understand that. The late policy still exists. And let me know if if there's anything I can do to help. So I don't engage them in a debate about whether my grace policy is fair or not. I don't debate with them about what I should or should not do. I refer them to the policy. I try to, model what I would call respectful behavior. I don't even question anymore. People have said, well, do you require them to prove that somebody died? No, I don't, because I wouldn't want somebody to make me prove it. If they're lying to me, they must be desperate. Grace, they get one lie. And then if they use that up, and then the next time they're not lying, karma. That's what happens. And I tell students that up front. And I even tell them, use your grace wisely, because you might not be able to predict later in the semester. So don't waste it now, and then when you need it, it's gone, because there's grace only happens once. And then I listen. Oftentimes students are coming at us and they're angry. And what I've discovered is if they don't ask me a question, I don't answer anything. I'll smile and I'll nod. And we'll get on a Zoom call and a student will tell me, oh my gosh, the rubric was so unfair and I'm an A student and I always get all A's and now you graded so harshly and you nailed me on APA style. And then they'll stop. And I just look at them. I'll smile. And then we have an awkward silence. And then I'll say, did you have a question? Because if they don't have a question, I don't need to engage them in a debate. So I listen to them. And I also, as I'm listening to them, I'm looking for those situational, philosophical, those other things that might give me insight as to why they're acting that way. In addition to that, I'll often look for cultural things. Sometimes when I get a really hostile email, what I'll discover later was, it wasn't hostile at all. It was a language issue. It was a cultural issue. It was a difference in perception. And so by me not responding to those, I can avoid intensifying or engaging in that kind of power struggle. So under this kind of rule of understand the context of the behavior, the kind of like key tip I would put in there is engage when they ask you a question. If they don't ask you a question, listen, smile, nod, show empathy. If they need to vent, I'm a big girl. I can take it. Vent at me all you want. And then I'll answer your questions. And if they come back to me, what do I do? Gosh, I'm getting a poor grade and you keep nailing me for APA style. I don't even know what I need to do. And then I'll go, well, do you have a question? What do I need to do? And then I'll say, oh, well, let me tell you. You're not doing this. You need to use a hanging indent. You need to double space your pages. I can tell you what to do. But I'm not going to engage on whether I'm an unfair grader or whether I'm too harsh. But I can sure answer their questions when they ask me a direct question. So then, this alone will often diffuse those difficult situations because they just need to get it out of their system. And if that doesn't get it out of their system, now what we want to do is really proactively just kind of shift things. How do we, in the context of the classroom, shift the focus? Get them back on track. Because we don't want to just start policing and engaging their behaviors. We want to keep remembering our job is to create a learning experience. Create a learning experience. Create a learning experience. Repeat that to yourself 10 times. My job is to create a learning experience. And so, when we have a difficult student, like a know-it-all, who wants to always tell me they're wrong and tell me that they learned something different in another class and tell me that they just read an article on the internet and tell me what their buddy just posted on Facebook. Actually, they wouldn't tell me about Facebook because that's for old people like me. They would Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. Now, instead of me engaging them, all I do is I say, oh, again, whatever, I'm going to focus on the course content because my job is to create a learning experience. So by not engaging in the power struggle, I'm the instructor, I'll tell you what's correct, I just focus on the content. So if a student wants to hop in and answer things, I can acknowledge, you know what? First of all, let's remember the situation. They're engaged, they're posting, they're interacting. If this is a face-to-face course, they're willing to talk. These are all good things. And if they're being a know-it-all, chances are they're trying to impress me and they're trying to get a good grade. So I don't need to come in there getting defensive about them stepping on my turf. Instead, I can acknowledge it and say, yes, my professional experience, we can highlight. It's okay to toot our horn a little bit. We're instructors for a reason. We're the experts. So we can say, my professional experience tells me this. My research tells me this. We can acknowledge there's a lot of disagreement, but for the purposes of this class, this is what we're going to go with here. Notice in any of these responses, there's two key pieces. One, I'm not engaging with the fact that they tried to know it all. I'm acknowledging their participation, and then I'm taking control of the situation and refocusing it. And we're doing it publicly because we want the class to be on the same page we are. We don't want the know-it-all student to take the whole class and go off track with them. Another potential difficult student that we have is the mutineer. And this is one that wants to be kind of the chronic complainer. They will complain in the discussion threads, they'll complain in the hallway. I've even had mutineer students who will send emails out to the entire class, and they want to get everybody involved. Usually the mutineer is frustrated and they believe that there's power in numbers. And so they think if they can get everybody complaining, then it becomes an us against them situation. And that is what you're going to try to avoid. You don't want to turn it into an us against them. All you need to do is go back to, hey guys, remember we talked about the course policies. Let's review those policies and procedures. If they're complaining, I'll just say, ooh, remember week 1 we talked about, if you have an issue with me, if you have an issue with the curriculum, I asked you to please send that to me privately. So let's go ahead and move this conversation offline. If they're trying to get others involved in it, you can just redirect. And you can say, if anybody wants to reach out to me individually, please do so. But in this course, right here, right now, whether it's the face-to-face discussion or the online one, we're going to talk about this. And so we're just going to redirect that conversation back to where we're at. What I found is when we tell them, please bring your conversations to me one-to-one, almost no one does. So they like to gang up, they like to complain, they like to try to rile the troops, but when push comes to shove and I say, bring it to me, usually it dies there and they decide it's not a big enough issue to come to me one-to-one with. The other student, and this one is probably the bane of my existence, and it's the bane of my existence because I recognize that they care. They do care. They want to be a good student. They are here because they are invested. But if I have another student that emails me what they need to do to get a grade without emailing me about what they need to do to learn, I think I might explode. Now what I do is I tell my students this. In that week 1, when we're talking about policies, procedures, and expectations, here's what I tell my students. I realize that grades are really important to you. And then I share my research and I show them, you know what, grades are important to everybody. And then I tell them, so what I've done is I've put a ton of work into making sure that my rubrics align with my grades and that my assignments align with my learning objectives. And so I have put hours upon hours upon hours in making sure that if you can score well on this rubric, that you have mastered that assignment that shows me you have the learning objectives. And then I give them a heartfelt plea that I am doing them a disservice if I let them make it through my class without learning these objectives, and that grade inflation will get them nowhere. And so if you can score well on this rubric, then we'll get you that A. I promise it will be fair, it will be equitable, it will be aligned, I will not blindside you, but you're going to earn it. The other thing I say in those course policies, and I tell them, I want you to shift your philosophy. You do not start any assignment with 100%, and then I take away points. I go, I've never in my life taken away a point. You start with a 0 and I give points. I'm a giver. And I tell them that, I give you everything I can give you. So let me give it to you. But they start with a 0 and they earn their A. They don't start with an A and I take those points away. So when I have students come to me, I must have an A, I just come back to them. I love how appreciative you are of this learning. I love how invested you are in the course. And you are right, this is challenging. And when you make it through this course, you're going to be prepared for X, 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 and X. And if you're having trouble, go back to that rubric. That rubric will tell you exactly what you need to do. Just review the rubric. And I listen to them. And I let them talk, and I let them complain, and I let them talk, and I point them to resources. If I say, you know what, the rubric showed you were kind of struggling with APA style, or you were struggling with sentence structure, let me tell you about the Writing Center on campus. Go talk to the Writing Center. Go get a tutor. We have a lot of resources. And so I also work to line them up with those resources. What often happens is they're not really as interested in using those resources, but then I can come back the next time they can complain and I say, did you use the resource? And they go, no. smile and nod. Because I told you what to do to get the A, to earn the A. And if you're not going to do your work, I can't do mine. And so, again, it goes back to setting them up with those policies and procedures. Another student, and I've had several people tell me, you know, I don't think this is a difficult student. They are a difficult student if we remember that our job is to make them learn, make a learning environment. And if a student won't engage in my learning environment, that becomes a difficulty for me, even though they're not taking up my time, even though they're not sending me emails. They're difficult because they're not letting me do my job. I need them to engage. I need them to learn. And so often if they're quiet, it's because they haven't gained the confidence yet to engage. So I pull them out individually and I'll say, hey, so-and-so, what do you think about this? I make sure when I do this, it's something relatively low stakes, because the goal here when working with the quiet student is to build their confidence. So give them something low stake on their opinion, on their thoughts, on their ideas. Or we can go out to the whole class and we can say, I want every single one of you. If you're in a face-to-face class, you can do this with things like a minute paper at the end of the course or at the end of the day. You can say, we have 3 minutes left. Pull out a piece of paper, tear off the top. We're going to think for 1 minute. So nobody write, put your pencils down. And then for 1 minute, I want you to share your response with me. Because even if they're not willing to talk out loud in class, if I can get them to talk on paper to me, if I can get them to give me their thoughts, give me their feedback, do something to interact so that I know they're taking advantage of that learning environment. The key with the quiet student is to actively increase their confidence in responding. And that might take us doing some of that push-pull back and forth with them. The other student that we see, I often think more with the non-traditional learners than we do with the traditional ones, is what Coe and Rosen call the controller. This is the student that wants the course ran on their terms. They want to know the assignments in advance. They want everything opened when they want it open. They want to be able to negotiate. They want to talk about how they're going to do things. They really, really want in it. Again, like the must-have an A student, this one's a bit challenging because they are invested and they do really, really, really care. So the controller, we need to work with giving them that logic, giving them that rationale, why we've structured it the way we've structured it. And I've had other faculty tell me, you know what, I don't have to justify myself to students. My answer to that is, you're right, you don't. But you're going to get a lot of difficult students and you're going to spend a lot of your time dealing with difficult students. Or you can change your philosophy. You can provide some of that justification and just explain to students why you do what you do. So when one of these controlling students comes to me and says, will you please open up all the weeks early? I like to work ahead. I'll say, oh, I'm not going to, but let me explain to you why. Let me tell you about why I keep it closed until this certain date. Or let me tell you about why we're going to do it the way I already have it set up. As instructors, we should know our why. And if we don't know why we're doing something the way we're doing it, we need to figure that out. And once we figure it out, we should be okay with sharing it with our students and telling them, here's why I have it sequenced the way I do. Here's why I'm going to have you turn in that draft at this time and then turn in the final project. Here's why I'm not allowing you to use Wikipedia. Here's why you have to use a journal article. Here's why a video is not appropriate right now. It's okay for us to give them the why. I even put in all of my classes every single week, and I don't do it as an overall general questions for the instructor, but I do it that week, and I'll say, what can I do this week to help you succeed? And that's where a lot of these whys come out. They'll say, well, why can't we do this? Or why can't we do this? Or can I do this? And then I'll just answer those. And because I put it in a discussion thread in my online classroom, I only have to answer it once. So now I haven't turned it into a one-to-one that's going to waste all my time, but I'll just give it to them as a class and explain that out. The other one that you get, particularly at the end of a semester, is the staller. And the staller is the people that just can't quite get their stuff done. They're chronically late. They're always, right out the edge. They're not logging in time. They're waiting till the end. These are the ones that I really have the most problems with my grace policy. Because what happens is early in the semester, they'll use their grace, and they'll use their grace ticket because they didn't quite get organized. And then later in the semester, they will have a computer malfunction. Their internet will go down. They will have a family emergency. And I'll say, I am so sorry. Do you have your grace left? And then they'll say, no, but this is an emergency. Well, I guess we're going to have to go back to the course policies. And then they will vent, and then they will frustrate. And what do? Remember step 2? We show empathy, and we wait for a question. Because this is not our problem. Stallers do not need any of our cognitive energy, nor do we need to get in a power struggle, nor do we need to engage it. All we have to do is go back and point them at what they need. Are you struggling with the content? Because again, what is our job? Create a learning environment. Create a learning environment. Oh, so you're confused? Let me point you to the correct learning lessons. Let me give you the direction you need to succeed. Oh, you're late with things? Please refer to the late policy. Please refer to the behavior expectations. Let's go back to those clearly established policies that we created in the beginning. You don't need to engage. You don't need to go with a back and a forth in a debate. And I actually usually, when I'm working with a staller, I start all my interactions with them with tons of empathy. I totally understand. I understand. I had the same problem. I have 4 children. Yes, I understand. And I relate to them. I don't give them any, and then when they're done, I smile and I nod, and please refer to the late policy. And then they'll say, well, you know, is there any exceptions? Did you use your grace? Oh, you used your grace? Please refer to the late policy. But you don't need to engage, and you don't need to get in a debate. Another online student, and this one is one that I also think is a little bit challenging to deal with, because a noisy student is an active student. They are in there. They are talking in class. They are posting. They are always available. But they're off topic. They missteer people. They take us in the wrong direction. And yet they're so loud that they often are leaders in the classroom. The noisy student, the challenge is to keep them active. We don't want to shut them down. We want their activity, but we want to realign it to things we care about. So the noisy student, you want to just keep telling yourself, refocus. I need to refocus. Acknowledge that it's interesting, refocus. Didn't respond to the question? Oh, wait a minute, let me rephrase the question. Oh, I don't quite get it, rephrase the question. I'm not seeing the association, let me rephrase the question. With a noisy student, you don't want to come back and say, that is irrelevant, that is off topic, because those things are going to make them defensive and are going to shut them down. They're going to quit interacting. What you want to do is steer that excitement, steer the enthusiasm back on topic. Sometimes the noisy student simply needs more direction. They don't understand the first question, the way it was posed or how it was worded. And so they kind of just say something because it's in their nature to talk, but it's not on track. So rephrase it, reword it, give them a task. I'll say, what you said is interesting, but it doesn't relate to X. Please read the following article, or please glance at the following video. That more effectively explains it. And now let's focus on this. So just keep re-steering them back. We might need to rephrase it, we might need to reword it, but the focus here is to come back on task. You want to use the noisy student to your advantage. Noisy students can get other people talking, and an engaged classroom is a good classroom. So we want to encourage the participation. If we shut them down, other people are going to get worried that we'll shut their posts down too. Likewise, if you're in the face-to-face classroom, if we discount a student, everyone else is going to see that they were discounted, and they're going to be hesitant to engage as well. So we want to encourage them. We want to build them up. That is an awesome thought. Let's hold it, and let's come back to that later. Right now, we're going to focus on this. Or, that's very interesting, not completely associated with what we're talking about now, so let's put that one on the back burner, and let's revisit it. Sometimes in a face-to-face classroom, when I've really struggled with some noisy students, I've even gone to having a person that I call it my record keeper. And I'll say, hey, record keeper, write down that we're going to come back to that. And then about once a month as the semester progresses, I'll say, hey, record keeper, let's bring up all of our side conversations, and let's wrap some of those up, and let's bring those back together. And so I want that noisy student to know they're being heard, but I want to refocus them back on task. This list in no way, shape, or form touches every kind of a difficult student that we get. But hopefully you notice a theme. The key here, we want to create a learning environment. So you're off task, we're going to put you back on task. You're angry, we're not going to respond to the anger. You're frustrated, we're not going to respond to the frustration. We're going to keep pointing you back to the learning experience. You really do want to develop that thick skin because they're going to blame you. They're going to get mad at you. Their failures are your fault. At which point we smile, nod, and wait for a question. As an instructor, we do have the power. And so we don't need to engage that power. We can use that power within to force ourselves to recognize that as the power holder, they just needed someone to release it on. Is it nice? No. Is it civil? No. I'm pretty sure as adults, we can let that go. Unless it escalates. And when it escalates, that's when we move to step 4. Step 4 is to the point that your attempts to acknowledge, to refocus, and to empathize have failed. And it's simply not enough. And this is when you now have to say, I'm going to do more than redirect. I'm going to follow up with that person. And this is where we start to have some of those difficult conversations. Because when you start to follow up, now we need the student to know that we have some expectations that have been violated and that there's going to be some sort of behavior plan, expectation, or policy that we need them to follow. When we move into step 4, we do have to start worrying about documenting, because now we're starting to bridge that gap of they were annoying and a pain to they are actually a problem and a policy violation. So at this point, I always recommend getting it in writing. Whether it's face-to-face or an online class, send an individual email that says, I really appreciate the following, because we're going to put this bad boy in a sandwich. We don't want to make them defensive right away. So we're going to acknowledge the good things they've done. We're going to acknowledge whatever contributions we've had. We're going to give them whatever we can to start that conversation. And then we're going to say, and I have some concerns. And here's what my concerns are. And then we're going to follow that up with, and here's what I propose to remedy it, or how do you propose we remedy it? Because bringing that student in can be a really effective way of dealing with that conflict. Once you've moved to that one-on-one, now it's time to make it a little more formal, because these are the communications that if this escalates and they complain about you, you complain about them, it becomes a dangerous situation. It's something that moves into the courts, as my situation had. These are going to be things that you are actually now documenting your case. And even though the vast majority of difficult students will not get to this point, you need to be prepared. So at this point, when you're communicating with them, you need to really focus on the issue at hand. You need to identify what they're doing well. You need to identify why you're concerned, and you need to open up that conversation or set those expectations for how that's going to be resolved. To avoid escalating it even further, this is where you really want to emphasize the collaboration. Bring them in. Let them know that you're not the police, you're the faculty member, and that you know they want to succeed. That's what's leading to this frustration. And it's okay to tell them, I know you're frustrated because you care. And I'm frustrated because of X. And so we've got a discrepancy here, and we're not going to argue about it. We're not going to debate about it. We're going to look for solutions. Bring them in. I've had students in which I come back to them and I say, you know, your Turnitin report came in with a 75% similarity index. That's in violation of the policies. What are we going to do to resolve this? I mean, I could just give you a 0, but are we going to learn from this? Are we going to move forward? How do we resolve this? What do you think is fair? And I've had students tell me at that point, I cheated. It's not, I'll take the 0. Okay, good enough. I've had other students at that point that are like, oh, I didn't know, I'm dying. Like, I didn't understand. And then I'll say, well, okay, if we're serious about this, you know what it's going to take? You're going to go to the tutoring center. You're going to complete an academic honesty course. You're going to do X. Give them a whole lot of very time-consuming and painful hoops. But I might let them rewrite it if they're really invested in generating a solution. I've been surprised at the number of students who frankly aren't interested in generating a solution. They're willing to take the F if I'm not willing to cave. But the fact that I came with them with this kind of collaborative spirit avoided it escalating into an argument between me and them, with them going above my head to complain to administrators about me. And this is where we want to, if that doesn't solve it, kind of laying out to them what needs to be done, then we need to directly address the problem behavior. Now we need to go to them and say, you know, this is happening. It is a problem. Tell me your views. Here's the violations that I'm experiencing in the classroom. When you've had this conversation, in writing, summarize it, and then let students know what's going to happen. Are you turning them into the conduct committee of the university? Are you submitting an academic dishonesty report to the institution? All of this needs to be in writing, and you need to be willing to have that difficult conversation if you aren't able to de-escalate the situation earlier. And the very, very last step, and then be willing to actually utilize those university policies. Bring in the administrators, bring in your department chair, your dean, whatever's appropriate in your situation. Identify what institutional resources are available for you to use. Document, document, document. Report whatever reports need to be submitted, and then seek support. This is where you want to reach out to your colleagues, because if it is escalated to this point, this is now a rare case where you're going to start second guessing and questioning whether you're doing the right thing and what you should do. And so reach out. This is the perfect time to go for coffee and say, hey, I'm just needing a sounding board here to make sure I'm on the same page. Save your sanity. Bring in your support resources. My final thought in all of this, when we talk about dealing with difficult students, is dealing with difficult students really starts with dealing with ourselves. And we need to start changing their behavior by changing our own. If we're confrontational, they're confrontational. If our expectations are fuzzy, they're going to take advantage of that. If we're not organized, they're going to be frustrated. If we don't follow our own policies, why would they follow our own policies? Why have a policy if you're not going to implement it? The solution in all of this is for you to really create an environment that's going to prevent those difficulties, and then figure out what works for you. Because your solution that's effective is probably different than my solution that's effective. I'm relatively informal. If you're relatively informal, my approach might work for you. If you have a much more formal personality, or if you're much more of an introvert, you might say, oh my gosh, that's not something I could do. Well, then don't do it. Find something that works for you, that works for your ethics, your sounding board, your baseline, and the way you relate to your students. I work in psychology. And so in psychology, I can have conversations with them about empathy and caring and connections and frustration and all these things that are discipline relevant while also talking about their behavior. Other disciplines, people might say, that's not something I'm comfortable with. And that's okay. So find something you're comfortable with. At this point, I don't have more to present with you, but I do have, if we have time and interest, we can go through some examples in which you can talk about it or brainstorm it, or recognizing that I believe our time is up or really close to up, we can just open it up for questions, comments, and thoughts.
Oh, she probably can't see you.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, let me turn off my sharing screen and then I can get a bigger view of your room and I might be able to actually see you. Let's see if that helps.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you talk about your GRACE policy?
Yeah, I have a GRACE policy in which every student gets one GRACE. And so when I lay it out to them, I say, here's what the GRACE policy is. The GRACE policy is my recognition that life happens. And so the GRACE policy is one freebie on a late assignment within 3 days, and I specify how much they can be late, and it's still GRACE. So they can use their GRACE one to turn it in 3 days late with no penalty. They can use their GRACE on a plagiarism score that's under 25% to get a redo on it. They can use their GRACE on a redo on a discussion thread that did not get full credit, so they can come back. But I tell them exactly what my GRACEs are, and I tell them the purpose of GRACE is to not only accommodate life happens, but to allow them to adjust to me. So if I did something or graded them harshly in a way that they didn't see coming, I want to give them GRACE and I want to give them a redo. GRACE also allows them a redo on APA style and writing and grammar. And so I tell them, you can use it once. So for example, a student will submit an assignment, I'll give it back to them, and let's say they totally bombed APA style and writing. The student can come back to me and go, can I use my GRACE and redo that? Yep. And then they'll redo it and I'll grade it without any penalty, just that portion. So they didn't get to redo the content part, but the writing and APA style. So I laid out very specific things they could use GRACE for. Overwhelmingly what they do use it for is late work. They'll use their GRACE card and say, oh, I was running behind, I didn't get it done, can I have GRACE? Yep, one time. And so I keep track of it. I just print out an Excel sheet, and when they use their GRACE, I just put an X. Their GRACE is gone. I put an X in the date they used it, and then when they come back and say whatever, I'll be like, ooh, sorry, bummer, you used your grace on October 5th. Too bad. So sad. I don't say that out loud. I say that in my head.
I have a question. I used to give a grace policy sort of on late assignments, but I got overwhelmed with students being late. So now I have a no late policy, which works for me better.
Mm-hmm.
How many students, isn't it, and maybe you don't have a lot of students who are using the grace policies, but it seems like that's a lot of work on you to figure out, 3 days for this student, 3 days for that student. I love the idea, but it just seems like that is draining upon you as the instructor.
Well, so two thoughts in that. One, I scare them a lot when I put out my policies in that week 1 on don't use your grace frivolously, use it when you really have to. So I usually have about 5 students per class that will use their grace, and that's a class of 25. So I'd say about a 5th of my students will use the grace. So it's not anywhere near 100%. The other thing that I've found is that the time I now do invest on giving grace, I save on angry email, frustrated, complaining, back and forths. So it does take more time. You are absolutely right, but I feel like it was a swap in time. So now I've swapped it. They are happy with me. They're not frustrated. I've had to give the time there versus I was going to give them time anyway when they were mad and wanted to negotiate being late, when I wasn't going to give them grace. And now in the end, it still took me time, but now they're mad and frustrated. So for me, it was almost a swap in time. But I would say you're right. It does take a little time. And so if you can establish a no grace policy, like deadline, no grace, and get them to buy in without the arguments, go for it. And sometimes I truly think my own personality is what brings the argument. At times I think I'm a little too approachable. And so because I'm approachable, they're more willing to argue and debate with me. And I think some people don't get in that situation. And I think that's great. If their personality doesn't get them in a boat that they have to negotiate that. I think I would go back to my last slide. What's your solution and works for you? If your students aren't challenging you on that, go with it. Like, don't give them grace then. If your students do, though, frequently want to, can I have it late? Can I turn it in late? Can I? And that's how my students were. And I'll take credit for that because that's how my personality allowed it. I think I almost elicited that from my students. And so I created a policy that worked with my personality. I would just rather give grace than argue. But I do think you have a really good point. It will take time.
And to what extent do you use text messaging as a formal means of communicating to and from the students?
I open it up to all my students. They all have my personal cell phone that they can text. None of them texted me during this presentation. I would say any given semester, I might receive 10 texts. So they have that option. It's not utilized very often. And overwhelmingly, the texts I get, again, are probably my own fault. I told them, I've got 4 kids that are between the ages of 9 and 14. They all play basketball. We're in season, people. We're gone constantly. So I'm like, on Saturday and Sunday, if you're freaking out and you need something, text me, because I won't get to my email till late Sunday night. And so I would rather you text me and I can answer it on Saturday and Sunday right quick than you get frustrated all day Saturday and all day Sunday until 8 p.m. Sunday when I log on to answer your questions. So even laying that out for them, I would truly maybe 10 a semester. I don't have a lot of people use it. And when I do, it's definitely Saturday and Sunday.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Usually, I group my students into group projects, right? Different, they have different personalities. Sometimes I see very aggressive personality. 2 members want to be the leader at the same time, and they want the instructor to be the judge. How do you deal with that situation?
Well, one thing I moved to a couple years ago, and I'm telling you, it's so simple, and yet it really made a difference. There was an article, and I can send it to you guys if you need it, in U.S. News and World Report. And what it basically said was employers are looking for the following skills. And it didn't matter what the major, what the discipline, whatever. This is what employers want. And the 2 of the top 3 items were communication and teamwork related things. It was all about the ability to adapt, work in teams, collaborate. And so every time I give a group project now, I start it with, And here's why we're doing this group project. You know what? In the end, I hardly even care about the content. What we're doing with this group project and why I'm making you work in a group is because I'm preparing you for a job. And in those jobs, here's what your employers want. So if you can effectively complete this group project and navigate, and I tell them, navigate the fact you're not going to like each other, 2 of you are going to fight, 3 of you are going to want to be leaders, 2 of you aren't going to want to do anything. Let's lay this all out there. Here's what employers want. And if you can't navigate this, you aren't building yourself up and ready for employment. At that point now, students are so scared to tell me that people are fighting and arguing for fear that they're not employable, that I think them understanding why I forced them to work in a group has eliminated virtually all of the complaints I had about hating group projects and hating working together and can I just do this alone and my group mate didn't show up. And I'll tell them, in the real world, if your group mate doesn't show up, you figure it out. And then you go and tell your boss so-and-so didn't show up. But you figure it out. And that's how the real world works. And so I've shifted every group project to have an emphasis on, yes, the outcome is important, but what I'm more concerned about here is your skills. I want to see that you can develop collaboration, teamwork, communication. And if you can do that, that's what I care about. If you can't do that, I'm a little worried about this group project. And so they started doing a much better job of navigating that instead of turning me into, you know, the babysitter police of who did what in their groups.
Is she going to share the PowerPoint?
Sure, I can. I haven't yet because I might have fallen into that staller category that finished it 10 minutes before our session today.
Can you
I will share it afterwards.
Can you share if your student evaluations have changed once you've implemented these strategies?
You know, I wish I could say they have. I don't think my student evals have changed. And I don't mean this to sound like cocky. Generally speaking, they've been high. Even when my students have been unhappy about things, the overwhelming number was high. So I still get good student evals. What I've discovered, though, is I'm not fighting. What changed for me is if I could tell you my perception of the experience. Students were fairly happy before. They're still fairly happy now. Of course, there's still a few angry ones now and then, but overwhelmingly, it just has felt like a more content classroom. We're just not having the difficulties. We're almost sidestepping them before they happen. So instead of having to resolve it and get them satisfied, we just kind of stayed satisfied to begin with. And so I would not say I saw a big shift. Where I saw the shift was my stress level went down. I feel better about my teaching. I feel less stressed. I'm not inundated right now with all the, it's late, somebody died, my computer, I need help. If I don't pass this class, I'm kicked out of the university, I'm losing my scholar. I just don't get that anymore. And so I have felt it more on my own workload than I would say I saw it show up in any student evals.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Let me glance here. There were a few online that I may have gotten past. Let me just glance here. Yeah, Dr. Parker, what does GPA influence your options in life? Exactly, hardly at all. So I always tell them, like, let's quit focusing on grades, let's learn. And yes, grades are important. And then I do tell them, if I'm doing my job, learning will correlate with grades. And if I'm not doing my job, you should be frustrated. But yeah. Okay, no other big ones online. So if there's no other questions face-to-face, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. And if there were any other resources or things that you'd like to see, let me know. Or you can let them know and send them, you know, you guys can send me a mass email of what kinds of things you'd want to see or have, and I can send you those resources.
That was a great presentation.
Sorry, Jean.
Never mind, I'm checking out your ceiling and your lighting.
What was that?
I was just checking out your ceiling and your lighting as the camera.
Jean, this is Nicole Garvey. If you could email me your PowerPoint just whenever it's convenient for you, I can send it to all of our participants.
Perfect. I'll do that as soon as we get off the line here.
A copy of what? Her syllabus? Yeah. And Jean?
Yeah.
You do parenting webinars too?
What was that? I'm sorry.
I said, do you do parenting webinars too? Don't worry.
I need to attend a few of those parenting webinars, I'm telling you.
I feel like all of this is very applicable to parenting, right? I need help. Yeah, I need more grace. Oh, thank you. The dream. Okay, I think we are good.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
I'll ask her for the article too that she sent.
Okay. Syllabus.
Yeah. But you know what, and I didn't say this, it's just whenever I get more students, I get all A's. I just nice to nice. I said, you know, I got a lot of A's on the way to the so I understand how you feel. So I'm like, they don't sweat.
Right.
Like their first one, you got A's.
Thank you. This was
That's a pretty common student thing.
Right. It's very common, I mean, like, yeah.
And I'm really important with someone to say, you know where I
Thank you.